Welcome to Purple Octopus. From House Studios, this is a show for discovering wholeness in a fractured world.
I'm John Buck, Decision Maker.
I'm Karen Grimnig, Relating.
I'm Lauren Golden, Developing Human.
And I'm Francois Nukel, Paradigm Shifting.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to have a web chat. John Buck is going to present. John Buck is an organizer. He's had a long career of really thinking about and engaging with and helping people with new ways of thinking and new ways of organizing. And that's sort of a lifelong piece. He spent some time working in bureaucracies and understands that sort of conventional space. And for the last 10 years has been consulting folks into new space. So has written a couple of books, We the People, about sociocracy, and more recently, Bossa Nova, which is bringing together, again, this idea of bringing together different disciplines and how can we bring agility sort of across beyond the IP teams and bringing lots of different structures and disciplines together. And we're very excited that he's working on a new book called Governance from Below, Children Can Lead. And so we're excited to see what comes with that. So today he's going to be sharing with us. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce your talk, which is titled, I understand, Inventing Your World.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to go into screen share here and show some slides just to help me organize my thoughts. And here we go. Okay, so I've starting out with a picture of an inventor. Actually, this inventor is all of us because we all invent our own worlds. We invent our own realities, much more than you might think. And as we do our work in the world, whether it's healing the world or other things that you may be doing, you need to be really aware that much of what you think is reality is something you invented, and other people are doing the same thing. So in order to collaborate, to find truth, to seek proper goals and go after them, you are all need to be constantly testing this world that you've invented because it's only partially true. And so the first exercise that I have here is I have a series of exercises that I hope will illustrate to you what I'm talking about. The first one is the blind spot exercise. You may have seen this before. Please go ahead and do the exercise, though, that I'm about to present to you so that you can get the reminder of what you knew already, because I'll be trying to relate it to other things. In this exercise, you can see, we'll go on the top line here where we have a dot and a plus sign. And the exercise is to cover your right eye with your right hand and look at the plus sign. And if you kind of move toward the screen, back or forth from it, you will be able to notice that at a certain point, the dot disappears. My screen is a little bit wide apart, so I have to push it back a little bit. And there, usually I'm used to going close, and now I've pushed it back enough that the dot disappeared. And the question is, and if it didn't disappear for you, know that for most people it disappears. So what's going on is that your eye has a blind spot where the nerves leave the eye that's away from where you focus, but you can it does blot things out on the peripheral part of your vision. And you'll notice that when the dot disappeared, you did not see a black hole. You didn't see nothing. You instead saw the white sheet. And so we have to ask what's going on here. Why are we seeing a white sheet rather than a hole where we can't, where we're aware that we can't see something? And just to extend this a little bit, What are we inventing here? Let's try, again, covering your right eye with your right hand and look at the orange dot and go back and forth until you are far enough away or close enough that your blind spot is over that gap in the blue line. So you're looking here at the orange dot and you're trying to put your blind spot over the gap in the line. And some people, at least, many people, suddenly see a continuous blue line. The gap disappears. And what's happening, it's, oh, your mind wants to have a feeling of continuity and wholeness, and so it just conveniently fills in the blue line for you. You don't know that it's filling it in, but it's there. And that phenomena of filling in reality based on little things that we see, we get a sense of reality, and it's a very powerful drive in your mind to have a full sense of reality. And that gives you a sense of reality and you know, knowing what's going on, but you can be like quite blind to it. You can have a huge blind spot to your world. So here's another exercise. And I'm going to involve the rest of the panel here, if I can, in this, because my question to you is, how can these statements be true? Anybody have any thoughts? You're all muted, so you're not telling me. How can these three statements be true? Everybody's shaking their head. Nobody's, okay, Karen's unmuting. Yeah. I know of some people who will spend half, 3/4 of an hour on this question, and yet the people who solve it quickest tend to be kindergartners. It's really obvious. Okay, here's what it is. We are asking how many circles are in here. So the 6 here has a circle, so there's 1. The 8 has 2, so the answer is 2. The 1, 7, and 4 don't have any enclosed things. That's 0. Simple, but you couldn't see it. A kindergartner can see it, but you couldn't see it. You were blind because you came in with the idea that, oh, you see an equal sign, you have to, you know, do mathematics. But that's your framework that you're bringing that blinds you to other possibilities. And very often when people are trying to make decisions together and they're yelling, it's true it's this way, it's true it's that way, it's like, yeah, but you're just kind of inventing things, folks. That's not really true. And I'm actually going to be using this little thing in my book about how children can lead the way, because children actually can see things that we can't see. And in our complex world, I think we need that quality often more than all our sophisticated training. So here's another blind spot. I'm going to tell you a story and then ask you a question about the story at the end of the story. So one day, a little girl, say maybe she's 4 or 5 years old, imagine, is in a country store with her father. It's like, you know, the old kind where it's not like the big grocery store, but there's just stuff sitting around in bins, and you know the owner, and everybody likes going in there on Saturday to hang out, that kind of thing. And the father was buying a lot of food this morning, and the shop owner says to the little girl, well, it's so nice to see you. Why don't you just grab a handful of candy as a thank you for being our customer today? And the little girl just stood there and looked at first at the grocery man and then at her father. And they got kind of uncomfortable. Why is this little girl staring at us? And she particularly stared at her father. And her father said, you can go ahead and grab the candy. And the little girl said, no, or she didn't say anything. She just looked at him. And finally, he grabbed a handful and said, okay, come on, let's go. And they left the store. And so as they were walking home, he said to his little girl, why wouldn't you grab the candy? And the question is, what did the little girl say? What was her reason for not grabbing the candy?
What strikes me is that the father's handful was probably bigger.
That's right. Very good. You're one of the few people I've put this to that gets that. She says, Daddy, you have much bigger hands than I do. So yes, it's the sort of thing where the two grown-ups couldn't figure out why she might be doing that. So again, the frameworks they bring blind them to the obvious reality. Very good, Karen. So here's another story. Imagine that you're in a sort of laboratory and that you're in a room and they've told you that there is a pattern of behavior you have to do, pressing buttons and so forth, that you have to figure it out, and that as you do the right things, a light will blink. And so you start pushing buttons and you get up and you move your chair and the light blinks. And so then you start moving your chair some more. The light doesn't blink. So you then press a button and the light blinks. And so you try other things and pretty soon you figure out exactly how to make the light blink. And you repeat that pattern for the rest of your time, and the lights, you're often getting that light to blink. Well, of course, the people had never been in a psychology lab and to know about just random blinks of the light, and that you actually will exhibit what's called religious behavior by some psychologists, or superstitious behavior by others, and in that you are used to controlling your world, and if things are just not happening, or if they're happening at random, you will still invent what you think is the way you should deal with them. And people who did this have done all kinds of things, smashing buttons and running around the room. One woman was standing on her chair, pushing against the ceiling, thinking that they were actually doing something that was related to the light, but it was just them inventing the reality. They would be best just to sit there and quietly meditate. It would have been just as effective. And that happens all the time. Things happen in the world and you think there's causation and you invent it and you then act on that. So those are just all things about, different ways, examples of how you invent your reality all the time. If you observe yourself for a day, you'll see that there are many things that you presume to be true that actually weren't true. Not just things around the house, but particularly in talking with other people. So you don't have to be victim to this stuff. You do have to know that you're dealing with a complex world, and that the defense, if you want, against the tendency to invent false reality is to engage in what's called reflexive inquiry. Ralph Stacey, pictured on the right-hand side of the screen here, is an expert in the field of complexity. And his message is that you need periodically to sit together with other people to think together about how we are thinking about what we are doing. It's very practical. What kind of practical judgments are we making? You'll probably get into things like ethics and all that sort of thing, but by engaging in this, you may find that you have what's called transformative learning, where suddenly you have a different framework about the world, and you can, like, wow, when I think of the world this way, then all these things flow differently. And the doing reflexive inquiry is probably the most creative thing that you can do in terms of, I'll call it anthrocomplexity. And so if we're healing our world, we have to be talking about, how are we thinking about that? What does that mean to heal it? How are we going about it? Why are we doing that? Not all the time, but you have to do it enough that you stay aligned with each other and aligned with new ideas that can pop up, because whatever you're doing, you're going to be not seeing certain things, just as we saw in the diagram. And in order to see them, you have to talk with each other about, why are we doing this? So that's pretty much what I had to say about the importance of the fact that we invent reality. And I'll turn it back to you, Karen.
Thanks, John. That's interesting stuff to think about for sure. So as is our practice, I'm going to open it up to the group in order, and we'll just do a round of response and what comes up for each of us as we're hearing what John's had to say. So Francois.
Okay, so a number of things come to mind. First of all, reaching a certain age, we're no longer inventing our world, but what we need to do is reinvent our world, which is something that I'm really keen on. And in fact, I didn't mention that in my introduction because I was looking from a tools point of view, but one of the key things I'm particularly interested in is in reinventing. Of course, I mentioned paradigm shift, but that involves also reinventing ourselves and reinventing how we a mind shift or how we see things. The filling the gap exercise with the line, that actually reminded me of an old experiment. It's all probably about 100 years now, when film first came to be, and I think it was the filmmaker Godard who demonstrated that very same point, but in a completely different way. He took a film of a man entering a man entering a room, and the actor was simply told to act as neutral as possible, which he did. Then Godard put that put a montage of a film of, he took a picture of a naked woman, then the man entering the room, and then a naked woman again, or something like that. And he asked a neutral audience who hadn't been briefed, who had not seen just the film of the man entering, who just saw that sort of series, and asked, what was he feeling? And everybody immediately said, well, immediately so responded, but they were feeling sort of erotic sensations of lust and all kinds of similar kind of responses. Then he created another film, or a segment of a film, which was simply a dead body. Then the same person again, neutral coming in, and then the dead body. And he asked the audience, what was a man feeling in this case? And they all said, well, sadness and convalescence and all kinds of things related to sadness. And he asked the audience, did you actually see the actor displaying that? And they were all convinced that they did. Whereas in fact, the film was exactly the same. It was just that neutral person. So we make associations. We fill the, again, this is a question, is filling the gap, and we make associations between different things we see. So we, in that sense, that's another way we create. And in fact, film is built around that. It's about the connections we make. And then I also have something to say about reflexively inquire, but I'm going to leave that now and let the round go round, and maybe there'll be another opportunity for me to do so.
Thanks, Francois. Great to hear different examples. So that's wonderful. Laureen.
I mean, just first, gratitude, John. Very neat exercises just to kind of really meet our blind spot, because it is a blind spot. And I guess for me, Francois zoomed in, so I'll zoom out for a bit, but just, I think as a society, we've really made a shift from what was more simple into a much more complex context that we're primarily operating in. And so the role, I think what I'm sitting with is just the role of dialogue as key. I think it was Otto Scharmer who said that dialogue is the capacity for a group to see itself. And so I think that's really what I'm just sitting with is and do we make time for it? You know, in a world where we value doing, are we making time for being together with enough time to surface the assumptions and surface the different angles and to create a larger whole? So just thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. You often bring that big picture, which I appreciate about you. So taking my turn, I likewise appreciating, John, the sort of demonstration of how our minds work and bringing awareness. And you use that word awareness. I think that's so important, that it's not that this is a good way or a bad way, but just to be aware of what it does and what it doesn't do. And I think the other word that you used was about what's true and how we assess what's true. And I think that that's a place that I really lean into in kind of the work that I do. And think about, one of the things that I think about in that context is that we're really in a kind of new space in human history. For most of human history, we spoke in stories which were laced with emotions and feelings and sort of wisdom. And then science happened. And we got this concept that you could prove things. And by proving it, you could know what the truth was. And so we began to see ourselves as having the ability to know what was true. And I think what you're pointing out, John, is that in fact, we're not very good at discerning anything that is universally true. And that when we get into relationship and dialogue, as you're pointing to, Lorraine, and these spaces with each other, that what we find is that truth is something that comes in the space between, as opposed to something that the human mind is designed to hold as an individual. And so I think that just sort of rethinking what we mean when we use the word true, and having that awareness of, if it only came from me, the odds that it's true for everybody else are pretty darn small, no matter how smart I think I am, or how much cognitive information, or how much sort of proof in that sort of scientific realm. And also just holding for ourselves that most of human history did not have that like proven truth concept. Like they wouldn't have even known what that meant. So with the sort of scientific inquiry stuff that came this idea that serves us in some ways. And I think what John's pointing to is an awareness of the ways in which it does not serve us. So that's what comes up for me in response, John, to what you were sharing. And John, you're next in the round.
I was really stimulated by kind of the general step back that you did, Lorraine, because it made me think of really big things that are happening that we can't see. For example, most of you probably live either in an apartment building or a suburb. And unless you've lived maybe in that suburb for a long time, you may not even know the names of the people who live in the houses just 3 or 4 houses away. If you're in an apartment building, you might say hello to somebody in an elevator, but they might live just 2 doors down the hall and you don't know them. You may be well connected other places in the city, but the people that are right next to you, it's like, what am I doing next to those people? It's called a neighborhood. And for most of human existence, you lived in a neighborhood. You lived in maybe a band of 30, 40 people. That's what the basic building block of human identity is. And I can see it even in my lifetime. The places I lived when I was just a kid, we were quite free to go out and roam the neighborhood. A lot of times the neighbors, particularly the women, would get together and do something together on a Saturday morning. There was a connection. And then over time, we lived in several places as I was growing up, and I've lived there since then. Over time, people don't want to let their kids go out and run around because there might be danger out there. And I would feel uncomfortable talking to my neighbor. And this push toward the unit is the family, or the single person, and you're connected with a very large society, but not with the people right next to you. That's new, and it's really hard to see, and it's leading to a lot of problems, and we can't see it. So that's one example of a huge blind spot that I'm aware of that I invite you to observe.
Thanks, John. I'm just going to continue the round around. Francois, I think you have more thoughts.
You're unmute.
Francois, if you'll unmute yourself, please.
Sorry. Yes, and I think this relates directly to what John has just said, because as individuals, we've got blind spots. We've got we fill in the gaps and do all the things that John has sort of described. But I think this is not just true of individuals. This is also true of groups of people, and communities of people. So we've got group blind spots. We've got group fill-ins, if that's the way you want to call it, and I would in fact say that's one way you can actually define culture, because that's the culture is a way of looking at is a particular way of looking at the world, which a certain set of people, even to a grand scale of a national level, look at things, which includes all the things they don't see, and there's there's probably more that we don't see than we do see, because it's our created reality. So I'm totally aligned with all of this, because I've seen it in terms of, on the culture side. And so what I would like to add to what Stacey has said in the reflexive inquiry is, and to that quote you put up, John, think together about how we are thinking about what we are doing. Maybe I've got that quote not right, but the think together, it requires a little bit more than thinking together. Because it's more than just thinking in the groups you're already in. What we need to expand that to think outside the groups we're not in, so and bring those together. So there's a bigger dynamic. So basically what I'm suggesting is we actually expand that, not just to be, and that's the problem with working in teams. In organizations, for example, we tend to work in teams, and the problem with teams, the teams have got their own blind spots, and we need to break those teams as far as reflective inquiry is concerned, in order to, and that's where it relates to complexity, of course, and the ability to deal with complexity. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Francois. Layers and layers. Laureen.
I'm appreciating the discussion that is emerging here. And lots of bubbles. So I think the one I would want to lean into, just Francois, what you're talking about, it makes me think of something that I've talked about with Ted Rao before, but just playing the both end between, there's value, I think, for coming together with the familiarity, like groups that know each other, like you could call like almost like a home team, like you have a shared language, and there's a certain amount of stuff that you can do together due to similarities. So groups that you can almost say based on similarities. But I think what we're missing is the end, like in addition to them, the need to come together as cross-functional teams, which is kind of what this is. And we're, developing our own pool of shared meaning, but with people, there's that book about the 6 thinking hats, but like, that we each come with a certain way of seeing the world. And I think sometimes it feels most comfortable to be with people who kind of see it the way we do, but to actually develop our tolerance to be with people who see it differently than us. And the value for that. And that's much more of a stretch. And I think that involves building a tolerance and, to zoom out, John, I appreciated what you said before too, but there's so much talk about that we're in echo chambers right now. So, you could asking ourselves, like, am I putting myself in spaces of difference? Am I putting myself in spaces of sameness, and playing the upsides of both of those differences? Give me one more second. I have one more thing to say. I think, John, I would just want to amplify the notion of community that I heard embedded in yours response. Which makes me think of Peter Block and other people who talk about this community, the structure of belonging, and how it's hard to find that locally. And Karen, I think of you with your work with intentional communities around how do you actually start nourishing that and developing it for ourselves, because in a highly transient world, it's no longer built in there. We don't know the people next door to us. And it is something I'll speak for myself that I'm missing. And so, and it's not easy. There's something not easy about it. So again, the both end. I am complete.
Yeah, thanks, Lorraine. I'm also leaning into that both end space. And I think one of our tendencies, and I think this must have a piece in the blind spot stuff that John, you're talking about, is that, so we're in a culture shift now, I think, where we're sort of recognizing we've been very individual and now we want to go into group. And it's so easy to carry judgment with that, of, you know, that blind spots are a bad thing. And I love, John, that you really, as you introduced them, talked about why our brains do this. And it's a useful thing. It's creating coherence. It makes sense of our world for us. It's valuable. And in the same way, that space of being with our tribe, our comfort space, our like-minded folks, that there's value to that. There's a need for that. And if we only do that, then exactly what Francois was saying, we miss this other piece of what could be found, and really what we need of the rest of that viewpoint. Because the reality is that we are both more individualistic in our thinking than we've been in the past as a culture, and more interdependent in sort of the broader reality than we've ever been before, with worldwide commerce and just the fact that we're sitting here having a conversation against, what are we, 7 or 8 time zones that we span here. And so there's this interdependence piece. And I think we tend to swing to one end or the other. And that really that sweet spot of where we find resonance and coherence and connection is the between, is the both and, is the nuance of we do need those spaces that where we hang out with our like-minded folks. And we need the ability to welcome and engage with folks that are different, and spaces where that happens. And that neither is the answer alone. So it's the both end of all the things. But just, I think, having a lot of sort of curiosity and humility around the idea that what you were saying, Lorraine, of spaces of stretch. If we're totally comfortable and at peace, probably we're missing something that would be growth producing and rich and meaningful. And if we're feeling really stretched, sometimes that's a space to lean back into comfort. And so I think we tend to say, well, you should always be stretching, or you should always be comfortable. And it's the both end of finding both that I think leads us where we need to be going. And with that, I'm going to turn it to John.
It just occurred to me that we need to develop a capacity to play as we stretch. So a really simple example is that I've been privileged to go on trips to India, where I was like not a tourist, but inside the culture, not seeing another European for a few weeks at a time. And one of the things I loved learning about was the joys of eating food with your fingers. And there was a little 8th grader girl one time. I was sitting at dinner with her at a restaurant, and I would say, well, why do you like to eat with your fingers so much? And she said, try this. She said, take a fork, because they have forks around many restaurants for Westerners, but try eating this with a fork. So I did that. She said, notice that. She said, now reach out with your hand and touch that food as you're starting to pick it up, and notice that there's a little squirt of saliva in your mouth as you touch that food. So you're already starting to eat the food if you're touching it with your finger, and it tastes better. I did that, and she was right. I went like this, and I came back home and I started eating my dinner with my fingers, and my wife was like, oh, what are you doing? It's like, only 2-year-olds do that. And so I learned something, though. I explained that story to her. I said, would you experiment with me? And she said, oh, yeah, I do see what you're talking about. But we still need to eat with our forks and spoons, because, it's more comfortable. And so just the experiment, just the trying it out and playing with it is perhaps the most fun way to be healing our world. Playing with new ideas with those that we're close to and love and have established a culture with.
Thanks, John. I love that playfulness. So we're toward the end of the time that we've set aside. So as is our practice, I'd just like to offer a closing round. So we'll go in the same order, and just for a couple of sentences of what's coming together for you as we close this time together. Francois? If you would unmute, please.
So I really appreciate. So I really appreciate all the ideas and comments that be made, and they all, to me, sort of come together in a sense. Well, on one hand, I feel that we need to have a paradigm shift, but the paradigm shift is not simply a shift. Is maybe the wrong word in some sense, because really what it is, it's reinventing our world. It's reinventing the way we see things and so on. And it's not something that we can do on our own. It's something we have to do together. So I'm and there are all kinds of different things or different ways of seeing, and so a lot of the examples that John has introduced are just brilliant in that sense. So thank you, John.
Thanks, Francois. Lorraine?
I'll riff off of you, Francois, because I love the idea of paradigm shifting. I love the idea of reinventing. And to add into it, I would just say a notion of remembering that these aren't necessarily new things. They're things that are deeply woven in our histories and within, I think, like our DNAs. And so just, I think a lot of this is reclaiming, maybe some of this remembering and then reclaiming what matters. Because I think there's so much behind us that is necessary for the worlds before us.
Thanks, Lorraine. I think for me, I'm coming away with sort of two major themes. One is sort of the balancing of the nuances of sort of leaning in both directions and being aware of both. And I think the other is the importance of sort of awareness and consciousness, of sort of curiosity and humility as we seek truth, as we seek ways of being, and how important it is for us to do it all together. I guess that was three things. But that really, this is not work we can do sitting alone. It is work that we are absolutely designed to do in collective and collaborative spaces. John?
There's a sequel to my food story. There's a lesson in that too, is that we do actually not always use our forks now. We'll sometimes put on the hat of an Indian culture. So let's wear our Indian hats now, and then we do that, and then, okay, we take the Indian hats off and we eat the way we're used to. And so that helps with the playfulness, not to be trying to mush things together, but being able to hop between frameworks. And so I guess I kind of enjoy my day if I can do framework hopping, framework surfing. I'm this way now and that way there, so that's a way of doing different cultures, doing different viewpoints, and the world then becomes more of a mosaic of different frameworks. And that's very freeing.
Thanks, John. I love that concept of freeing, leaning into that. So thank you, everyone. It's been a delightful half hour or so, as always, with the four of us. So I appreciate you. So we will post this as we do in the Healing Our World space, sort of flag it with multi-mind and share it out. And we would love to hear comments back and look forward to the next time we're all together. Thanks, everybody.